Gibraltar is blessed with a rich variety of natural and human history. The rock and the town below have been home to many cultures and people over the centuries. The artifacts, monuments and memories that remain become our heritage, a common inheritance which we all share. And as Gibraltar moves forward and grows, it is up to us as a society to make sure this heritage endures and becomes a part of our future as well. Leading this effort is the Gibraltar Heritage Trust, an independent statutory body entrusted with the preservation of our heritage, whose aim it is to ensure that modern Gibraltar retains history and heritage at its heart. The melting pot that makes up Gibraltar's past is apparent in its heritage. On this rock, Moorish, Spanish, Jewish, Maltese and British influences have left their indelible mark in building the Gibraltarian city, its people and culture. The colourful history of Gibraltar's people is no more apparent than at Catalan Bay. This iconic cove, tucked away on Gibraltar's east side, will forever be identified with its history as a settlement for Genoese fishermen. The Genoese roots go all the way back to medieval times, when Genoese shipowners and merchants would trade goods between Muslim Spain and North Africa. Some would marry locals and Spaniards and settle in Gibraltar, and by 1777, 50% of the population were of Genoese ancestry. With the Genoese language being widely spoken throughout the city, some elements still living on today in many Genito references. The customs and traditions of Genoese heritage endure, even to this day, at Catalan Bay. At the southern end of Catalan Bay, hidden away in one of the alleys behind the seafront, is a property which harkens back over 150 years. The old cottage, which today represents one of the few existing examples of an original Catalan Bay townhouse, is in a near derelict state. Having been put out to tender some years ago for redevelopment, the project exemplifies the synergy between developers, the Town Planning Department, the DPC, the Gibraltar Heritage Trust and the Ministry for Heritage, all working together to safeguard heritage sites. As is now standard for many redevelopments of historic buildings or in historical areas, detailed evaluations or heritage assessments are required to be prepared to inform on the way such redevelopments are carried out. The aim being to ensure that the essence of these places are retained and safeguarded.
The cottage at La Galeta is a good example of how the planning process works and how, for example, documents such as desk-based assessments and archaeological watching briefs, which are conditioned as part of the planning process, come into the development process of a building. So in that case, when the application came up, we asked for a desk-based assessment to establish the historical value of that building, to ensure that we're not asking a developer or an owner to protect something which may have been built in the 1950s and just because it hasn't been looked after doesn't look that good. In that case, I mean, the desk-based assessment showed that it was one of the original cottages, so it was worthy of saving. So with that knowledge on board, the architect then started to look at, rather than looking at complete demolition of the site, it changed the whole starting point of the development to reintegration and redevelopment towards the rear of the site.
The cottage in Catalan Bay, that was a government tender. A client came to us to have a look at this, so we had a look at a scheme for them. Essentially, the existing building there's a small cottage, which is what you see as you walk down the alleyway, the passage. Behind it, there are a series of more modern kind of ad hoc extensions in the courtyard area, which are much less attractive. So intention on this scheme was to try and maintain the cottage in its current form as closely as possible, which is what we're going to do. And then to the back of the site, we're building a higher block with apartments in it, so that's mainly where the development is going to happen. So the front part of the development will stay pretty much as it is today. Every time we do a project, obviously, as part of the planning process, we're involved with the Heritage Trust. They will always comment at the planning stage on any of these projects. So They provided the DPC with a report on the existing building. We obviously received a copy of that report before it went to DPC, so we were aware of what their concerns were and which aspects of it they thought were important to try and maintain. So that's influenced our design when it went into planning.
Down at Catalan Bay, Dominic Lopez, archaeologist for the Gibraltar government, visits the site. As the representative for the Ministry of Heritage, his job is to ensure that heritage conditions imposed through the planning process are being adhered to, and to address any queries with the developer or contractors as they appear.
Hi, my name is Dominic Lopez. I'm the government archaeologist. I work for the Ministry for Heritage. So today we've come to the heart of Catalan Bay, to the Catalan Bay Village. We have come to undertake a photographic survey and a site visit of this particular building. It is not a listed site. It has heritage importance, but it is not protected by law. The building was constructed in the early 1820s. We can already see it in the 1830 maps, and you can actually see it in the 1865 rock model that's currently in the Gibraltar National Museum. We're very happy with the developer, not only on this site but on other sites as well, because we have managed to preserve the facade. Although they're gonna build behind it, we've been managed to retain the facade and the majority of the fenestration. And what we've come today is to undertake a photographic survey, as I already mentioned, of the external facade and of the internal areas, especially if there are any heritage features, although the majority of the areas inside are modern, so that we can have a record for posterity. The good thing nowadays compared to how things used to be back in the day is that archaeology and heritage are part and parcel of designs nowadays, and part and parcel of normal town planning policy and standards. So it's usually now a common, totally normal standard condition to include archaeological watching briefs, which is basically excavations or literally just watching to see if there's anything in the ground once they start piling and excavating and stuff. And to have some sort of heritage impact assessment or desk-based assessment prior to getting full planning permission, so everyone, including ourselves and including the developers, know what heritage value the building or what's underground archaeology is could be in situ, which makes our life much easier. And we oblige them to bring their own archaeologists as well, and we supervise, because we don't work for private developers, so it's up to them to bring expertise and do it. To be honest, my experience with private developers has been incredibly positive. They really know what they're doing for the most part, and they really do try and have a heritage sensitivities in the forefront. Before developers engage in any planning process, the majority of, if not all of them, usually take or undertake heritage impact assessments or desk-based assessments, which is basically a report analyzing the heritage value of the site and the history of the site, and if any underground archaeology would be available if groundworks are undertaken. Other than desk-based assessments, when construction starts, archaeological watching briefs and excavations, if groundworks are undertaken, will also take place. By archaeological watching briefs, I literally mean an archaeologist coming around and watching and looking to see if any archaeology is present. Nowadays, although we still have a long way to go, we are progressing in a very positive way with regards to heritage and archaeology in Gibraltar. We've got the new Heritage and Antiquities Act 2018, which gives us many more powers, and the majority of sites, important sites in Gibraltar, are also listed. And it also establishes a Heritage Council, which is a forum chaired by the Minister, where we can have a strategy and we can plan for the future. And one of the most important things is that heritage conditions, as I was mentioning before,
excavations, watching briefs, desk space assessments are pretty much standard now in any planning permission or planning condition. So I do feel the heritage is at the forefront, and that the majority of developers, if not all of them, do engage with us positively, and the developer in this case regarding this site has been very positive, and we've been able to work with them quite well. Other than what I already mentioned with regards that was one of the earliest townhouses built, and was built in the 1820s, there isn't a lot more history regarding this particular building. Obviously, with regards to the village of Catalan Bay in general, it has an important heritage context with regards to the fact that it was built in the early 19th century. Unfortunately, the majority of 18th century and 19th century townhouses in Catalan Bay have been demolished. The majority of them are now modern buildings, so that's why it's important to try and bank on the heritage features that we have now, and not allow further buildings with heritage value to become even more derelict and more neglected, and then we find ourselves in a situation where instead of keeping what we have, we just have to demolish what's available, and we lose it forever.
Gibraltar's rich heritage is evident through its built assets, old buildings, military structures, and places of worship amongst others. The process of listing buildings for protection ensures that changes to structures and sites deemed to be of historic value are managed in a sustainable way, and therefore aims to ensure a high level of quality in preserving the historic features as the city of Gibraltar develops and moves forward.
Within the Trust, the Board of Trustees, there's a number of working groups, all on specialist focus subjects. So, for example, you've got the Fortress of Gibraltar group, and we've also got an educational group, and one looking at listed buildings that we propose to government should be listed to add to the schedules that made it into the 2018 Heritage Act. There's a commitment from government to add to that list, and of course there's a structure within the Act which we didn't have in the previous Act, and was important to the Trust to get that in. A structure for listing more buildings into the future, and not just listing them but then managing them and being able to look after them. Under the old Act, the 1889 Act, for example, there were only 9 listed buildings within the old town. There were lots of monuments and fortifications and all that was all listed. But within the old town there was only 9 buildings and parts of buildings. So the arch at Victualling Yard was one of them, the old St Jago's Barracks, church door as well was the other part. Under the new 2018 Act we now have 37 listed buildings, all in government ownership at the moment, and we hope to be able to engage through the Heritage Advisory Council with private landlords owners to try and augment that list. So within the new Heritage Act, one of the main aims of the Trust was to have a structure to be able to list more in the future. And like I said earlier, we've gone from 9 to 37. We've got hundreds of buildings that we feel are of significance. Now those all need to be assessed. We need to have the Heritage Statement of Significance for each one of them. Some we've got ready, others, it's a large catalogue that are being worked on. The Ministry has personnel working on that too, so there's a huge collaborative effort going towards building that Sites and Monuments record, which is also a requirement of the new Act. And the aim is to have this structure, whereas before everything had to go by Act of Parliament to be listed. Now it's simpler in the sense that it just needs to be gazetted. But there needs to be a consensus from the Heritage and Antiquities Council, and that is then taken forward to government for these two to be listed. Once a building is listed, it's very easy to just sit back as a trust and think, we've saved the building, that's the end of the road. But actually that's where the work starts. One of the things that puts buildings most at risk is them becoming outdated or their uses not being able to keep up with the pace of society. So for us, a building needs to have a life. For example, the King's Bastion has been turned into a leisure centre. There are many who would have liked it to be a military museum, but I think there's something to be said about bringing life into a fortification in the centre of town with a community focus such as that. And I think that's one of the ways of bringing life into buildings, give them the community use and an ongoing use which allows them to be developed. So with the listing process, it's a question then of managing any work that gets done to them. It's not a question of stopping the work. Any works will be managed via a series of heritage licenses, and it will be a way of just like advising the kinds of material that can be used and the kinds of way that it can be used in the buildings.
The heart of Gibraltar's heritage lies in its community. We are the custodians of our history, and the memory of our descendants and their accomplishments depend on our efforts to remain relevant and to be enjoyed by future generations. Established in 1993, the Gibraltar Heritage Trust's Heritage Awards aim to recognise institutions, groups and individuals that have played their part in preserving Gibraltar's history. Throughout the years, the Trust has awarded a plethora of projects, developers, architects, gardeners, authors and filmmakers, honouring those who have contributed positively to preserving Gibraltar's heritage and culture. The awards play an important part in promoting public recognition of our history and in encouraging others to take heritage preservation or promotion to heart and make a difference to our community. The 2018 award winners showed the usual variety of material and a cross-section of the work going on across the community. Group award winners were the Arches, former police barracks, the children's book, The Story of Gibraltar, and the restoration of the Plata Villa. In the individual awards, Gil Podesta and Robert Sanguinetti for their respective work restoring elements of Gibraltar's heritage. Special commendations went to Mama Lottie's cookery books. This is Gibraltar, a book on the history of GBC and the Orion House in George's Lane. The Heritage Awards are handed out at a ceremony and dinner, where this year Mr. Dominic Tweddle of the National Museum of the Royal Navy was the guest speaker.
We're based in Portsmouth, that's where our headquarters are, but we have 7 sites across the country and we have 8 historic ships. Everything from HMS Victory, which of course came to Gibraltar, was a visitor here, latterly with Lord Nelson's body. So Victory is one of ours, but everything into modern ships as well. Gibraltar controls the entrance to the Mediterranean, and in controlling the entrance to the Mediterranean, it therefore controls the whole sea, and that was incredibly important for Britain in the 18th century, in the 19th century and in the 20th century. To me, the things that interest me are the siege defences, which I think are fantastic, the Second World War tunnelling, which is remarkable. I don't think you can see either of those things anywhere else in Europe. But then there's masses of other stuff to see, and I've been doing a walk around the town today, and you can't move more than 10 yards without bumping into something which is really interesting. One of the questions that you're often asked, well, what's the point of heritage? Well, actually, I think every building, every object has personal stories associated with it, and our job is to carry those stories from the past into the present and then hand them on for future generations. And we can't be the generation that fails to hand on individual stories of people who worked and strove and suffered in the past. I think these kinds of awards encourage people to aspire to do more and to do it better. And you've seen some fantastic projects delivered this evening. Every one of those is best of class, and that's fantastic.
Rock of Gibraltar and the people that have settled here over the ages have all contributed to where we live and who we are. The preservation of heritage is the preservation of ourselves. The artifacts, structures and experiences combined are a representation of who we are. An inheritance it is our duty to preserve moving forward, learning from the past and enriching our future. The Heritage Trust will continue to push for tightening of legal protection and heritage management systems to ensure that our common heritage is safeguarded as much as possible. It firmly believes that heritage lies at the heart of Gibraltar's community and identity. A people with no knowledge of their past, origin and culture is like a tree with no roots. It will never grow well and will topple over in the mildest of storms. To lose our heritage is to lose ourselves. The risk, if we do nothing, is too great.